apie XIX amžiaus Lietuvos senienininkus nuo Narbuto iki Daukanto. Ir tai buvo unikalus tarpdisciplininis veikalas, parašytas žmogaus, kuris kaip reta gebėjo sujungti XIX amžiaus lenkakalbę ir lietuviakalbę raštiją ir atpažino turinio bendrybės, simbolinės struktūras, kurių skirtingos kalbos negalėjo atskirti. Man tai labai imponuoja, iki dabar tokios tendencijos kažkokių tai pratęsimų dar vis lauki, nes iki šiol mūsų kultūros istorijoje taip susiformavo, kad mes lietuviai, bent tie, kurie tyrinėjam lenkų kalbą, ko gero dažniau įsisavinam, išmokstam, negu kad Lenkų akademijoje tai nutinka. Ir tai padeda mums dalyvauti toje lietuvių Lenkų kontubernijoje arba bohemoje. Silvestras Valiūnas tai pavadino linksmą kompaniją Telšių plungės kontubernija XIX amžiaus pradžioje, neva veikusią girtuoklių draugiją. Tai ta kontubernija. Tai šiandien aš jau nebekomentuosiu, nebežinau iš tikrųjų pagrindinių krypčių, kur juda Lenkų kultūros instituto tyrinėjimai ir tyrinėtojai, bet su profesore esam jau turėję tų kontaktų ir įvairaus profilio auditorijose ir manau, kad tai yra laiminga galimybė mums visiems susipažinti, atverti kai kurias patirčių plotmes ir išnaudoti mūsų visų prasmingesnės gyvensenos labui. Tai just your choice, Professor. English. I would like to imagine sometimes some academic bohema speaking 5-4 languages in one and understanding each other.
Tai aš pasakyčiau labai ačiū. Tai tikrai man labai didelis džiaugsmas būti Kaune, nors ir virtualiai. Ir tikiuosi, kad bus proga susitikti Kaune ne virtualiai. Bet šiandien mes esam, kur mes esam, ir aš esu savo namuose, ir jūs esate savo namuose. Ir vis tiek aš pabandysiu to tell my story about 19th century bohema, and this is also a signal for the language. I think that that more practical would be speaking English for the lecture, but it's just easier for me because until now, although all my hopes, I still don't visit Lithuania as many times as I would like to. So my Lithuanian practice is still demanding more time. But if after the lecture you will have questions or remarks or just associations, anything, thoughts to share, you would be more than welcome to speak Lithuanian because I understand the language. But because of lack of practice, it's really difficult to speak in the language for me. So, shall we start? Okay. I don't know if it is disappointing or not. I don't have a presentation, in a sense, a series of pictures. I would like to hide myself behind. I will just take your time for like half an hour of lecture, presentation, my story, and then just hoping for talk for the discussion. So when I got an invitation to present a lecture about 19th century academic bohema in Warsaw, I have to admit, I was a kind of surprised because this is not my subject, and particularly or personally speaking, I'm not very interested in the subject of just strange men running strange activities in the period like 200 years ago. and just to concentrate on them. They have their own place in literature and history of literature and history of culture. And really, this question was a kind of refreshing for me, and just attracting my attention into the very general line connected with maybe more universal theme, more universal question, what it means to be productive and unproductive in a sense of intellectual or creative activities. And I have this impression that the question of being the question of productivity or unproductivity and being pressed by this term is just a question of our time. I don't know how you live your academic life in Lithuania, but I'm absolutely sure that you live this life in a very similar term, in very similar terms as we are, in a sense that every year you have to prove that you are effective, creative, fruitful, and generally useful, that you produce publications, points, that you run international cooperation. And after many years of just being in this kind of regime, of course, this is maybe too strong word, after many years of being in the kind of regime, sometimes a human being asks herself or himself a question: what's the sense of all this? What's the sense of our academic work if we are so much concentrated on productivity, on effectiveness, as if we were in a kind of factory, maybe softer because this is just intellectual factory. So this contemporary context, this is important context for my lecture. Just actually, it's more a bundle of questions and things to think about than really a prepared, precise lecture. So the first question I would like to start with, this is the question, what bohema, what we call bohema in Polish, it's cyganeria, being a gypsy. What bohema is and was, and to what extent it is a kind of historical curiosity from like 150 or 200 years ago, and to what extent we can consider it as pattern of culture, way of being, lifestyle, or existential decision, which can be interesting even today, or maybe today. So if we focus on curiosity, and if we speak about Warsaw in the first half of the 19th century, in the first half of the century, in the area of Warsaw University, established in 1816 by Russian Tsar, which is until now a kind of problematic point in history of Polish culture, there were some people practicing something we could call Canter Culture. What it meant to practice Canter Culture in the first half of the century. It meant wearing strange costumes, being a bit or even more than a bit scandalous, writing poems, mostly bad poems, and drinking alcohol, mostly bad alcohol. Walking in shoes or without shoes, but if without shoes, it meant for some cases with shoes painted on your feet, like it was in the case of Samuel Fillerborn, one of the well-described representatives of Warsaw Bohema from the first half of the century. So we can stay, or we can agree that this is just curiosity. This is just history of otherness, of history of people who were practicing being an alien in their own society. This is just a history of people who neglect the norms and rules of the society. And this is just a history of people who played a theater of their lives, or they played their lives as a theater, in a sense that they were just masters of what we call inscenizacja, just putting themselves on a scene of public life. Of course, here we are very close to what Richard Sennett wrote in Fall of the Public Man, and all the story connected to changes or describing changes in public sphere in the period we call modernity in European society. But except for this question or the point connected to curiosity or reflecting on bohemia, being Bohemian as historical curiosity, I would also ask about possible contemporary meaning of this notion of being Bohemian, and what I would consider extremely attractive for reality we are now. This is this theme of practicing being a loser, very conscious practicing being a loser, seeing yourself as embodiment of anti-success, embodiment as a person who lost his or her life, staying away from what can be called career, and staying away played or fulfilled not as a pose, theatrical pose, but as real and really conscious alternative, which is, and here we face the problem, because how can we describe this alternative? And if we are looking for the right adjective or just right words to precise what it means to be alternative, what it means being alternative, is it being creative or being productive but in different sense than in a factory? Or maybe being alternative is just being yourself and celebrating of being yourself? All those phrases and words, in my opinion, are suspects or suspected, because using those phrases, we are on the field in which anyway important are either effectiveness, which links us to crispy and healthy capitalism. You live until you are effective, or using those words link us to celebrating self, which is directly connected to discourse typical for coaching, pop psychology, etc. But maybe developing the reflection on historical societies active in different cities of Europe in the 19th and the beginning of 20th centuries, we are always somewhere between Don Quixote and his really coherent concept and practice of living on his own rules, and between Beckett and his famous notion, fail better. And also somewhere between or after, maybe, there is Jack Halberstam with his book I consider really inspiring, The Queer Art of Failure, reminding us that literary art of failure is a tool of resistance used by the weak ones. Slow work, too slow work, no work, ineffective work, imitating indolence, playing indolence were historically, among others, strategies of resistance against slavery. This is actually what we call sabotage. So the theme of indolence being passive, which is always an accuse in our society to say to someone or to some social group, those are passive people. This is really, really very strong accusation. Lack of clear opposition, all these gestures of soft sabotage, spoiling, a spoiling system, not distracting it, but just spoiling. Obvious and visible anti-involvement, being anti-involved as anti-strategy, which is actually a strategy, since all those gestures and activities ruthlessly use unpredictability of ideology and its unmarked properties. Those are things raised by Halberstam in the queer art of failure, and important to us, to me, in this lecture. I think that this is important to us and to me in this lecture for understanding historical phenomena, as well as maybe to some extent, partly under many conditions, understanding ourselves today. But for the sake of academia, let's move to some historical examples and contexts. If we speak about the 19th century, the first half of the century, we have to remember that what we call creativity, especially personal creativity, especially creativity realized in a field of literature, has not been monetized yet, and in this period historically, which means that analyzing this time, we have to do with the authors who did not really confronted the question how much from the copyright, because actually there was no copyright, or will I get a prize for this novel? Because there were no prizes for the novel, except for Nobel Prize, but this is another story. Or will a main popular newspaper or internet portal employ me for the series of comments, reviews, weekly, daily? No, because this formula did not exist, except for fact that internet did not exist, which is not so obvious. I think that from the point of view of our reality, it is not so obvious. So trying to understand this reality from 200 years ago behind us, we are actually in a kind of archaeology of writing practices. There is no continuation between them and ourselves. And of course, here we can ask the question, from which moment in time people started to earn on their creativity. Definitely in literature, this is the second half of the 19th century. And just to remind the very famous sentence, I'm not sure if Balzac really produced this sentence, but it is being connected with his person, and maybe Balzac said that the writer has two very important parts of the body. The first part is head, because this part producing stories, and the other part is us, because this part which has to be physically strong, and just to spend long hours producing texts for publishing houses. So, this is the second half of the 19th century. Balzac, Bolesław Prus in Poland, Dumas. I don't know with Lithuanian authors and to what extent they were involved in this capitalistic movement, publishing movement, according to which authors were forced to produce content from week to week, from month to month, stories published in short parts, feuilletons, etc., etc. Of course, if we think about visual arts, we have this phenomenon of painting and mecenat, which is really old, but writing, it becomes a material, literature becomes a material valuable only in the second half of the 19th century. And only from that time, questions of productivity, writing and schedule, producing content and deadlines for novels and texts and essays, and generally speaking, what is called KPI, which means producing content according to deadline, becomes really important and forming intellectual activities. So now I would like to refer to 3 points which I think are important when we speak about being Bohemian or practicing bohema. In the first half of the 19th century, we confront time of revolution. What it means, time of revolution? I don't speak about, and I will not speak about French Revolution and only all these brutal convulsions which shook European societies in that time, but about a kind of slinking revolution or Haydn Revolution, which meant that people descending from not elite families entered elites of the society. This is the experience of every society in Europe in the beginning of 19th century. This change that people of non-aristocratic descent can be present in chambers of aristocracy. In any European society, in any history of literature, you can get examples of very famous people who were of non-aristocratic descent and became important people in during 19th century. But what it meant to be a person from a noble house, but not aristocratic house, noble house, but not from the magnates, and appearing himself in the court or just between high society of the time. It meant that a person was allowed to participate in this life, but it also meant that this person had not a code how to behave. This is a case of many romantic poets descending from non-aristocratic families in Germany, in former Poland, in Lithuania, allowed to participate in crème de la crème of social life and absolutely not knowing, put the hands in the pockets or no, where, when to sit, when to stand, what the titles should be used to address people. Actually, do you eat with this cake with fork or with the spoon? How much sugar you put to your coffee? Cream or not cream? And how to eat lobster, etc., etc. And I'm absolutely sure that each of us, as we are now during our virtual meeting, at least once in a life experienced such a situation, that definitely you're a doctor or even professor, and you are somewhere in creme de la creme of European society, and really you don't know how to eat the lobster. So this is contemporary and historical experience of those people, and just addressing your empathy, you understand perfectly that this not knowing cream or not cream, sugar and how much, count, viscount or baroness, and how to eat the lobster just raises the anger. And this is the beginning of the revolution. This feeling of aesthetical and habitual, just referring to Bourdieu, habitual uneasiness. So I think that we have to understand that being Bohemian and this gesture of denying rules of the society, this is the gesture coming from a kind of uneasiness, discomfort, lacking of knowledge, and this is just alternative project because habitual base just didn't exist. The second point I would like to refer here is just reminding that still we are discussing the first half of the 19th century. This is university. Now we consider university as a very important area, very important institution for building peer relations. In the first half of the 19th century, universities in Europe were institutions of pure conservatism, undergoing a change of that time. It was Humboldtian reform, but still in our part of the Europe, those were institutions just strongly aimed at imitating and multiplication of these obligatory rules of the society. But because, and this is the third point, but because students were young anyway and always, what we experienced in the first half of the 19th century, it was the revolution of the youth. And I've talked about this text in Kaunas some years ago, and still I'm sure this is really, really important, the manifest of the generation. This is this great drama by Friedrich Schiller, Die Räuber, Pleschikai, creating just absolutely new version of the hero, new version of emotional story. But first of all, generally new patterns of emotions. And Die Räuber by Schiller, Pleschikai, this is this absolutely breaking point in European history and expressions, because this is the text which allows emotions like disappointment, anger, fury, and instinct of just destructiveness for the sake of building new world, maybe sometime under some circumstances, as absolutely basic emotions of the era, of the epoch. And the consequences of expressions or emotions expressed in this drama are really far away and living for 2 centuries at least. And from Schiller, we can learn that emotional is not personal. Emotional is political. And this is this change made by his text. But anyway, what it means to be counter-cultural or to be alternative, to be anti-system in those era, in those time of the first half of the century. The very obvious mistake we often make, this is mixing Romanticism with Classicism, I would say, and permanent reading Romanticism and as a period which from the very beginning was classical, which it was not. We are familiar with texts. We read Romantic texts in school, and I think that this is common Polish and Lithuanian experience. This is base of our national identity. We are surrounded by monuments representing Romantic heroes. We are involved in celebrations or imit or repeat celebrations in romantic mood. This story of martyrdom, national martyrdom, heroes of national identity, etc., etc. Those are stories which are in Eastern Europe. We are in those are stories which are still alive, but in its own time, Romanticism was not classical. Romanticism was just an alternative revolution, something against, and this is real heritage of the time. I would say, being against. This is a real heritage of this time. Being against whatever you are in, whatever you are surrounded by, being against, being critical, being destructive. This is real heritage of Romantic spirit, and what it means, being against. And here we have two choices, I think. We can follow this path, aesthetic path. And if we try to understand Bohemian behaviors, you know, all this reciting poems, drinking alcohol, being strange, making scandals, etc., etc., in purely aesthetic terms, we can conclude that bohema is just fun. This is a kind of permanent party. Using terms of Roger Caillois and his interpretation of games, we can say that bohema, this is Ealings, and Ealings, those are games based on dizziness. So being Bohemian, it can be permanent dizziness, fun, party, just not living this reality. But if it's not a play, if we just widen the perspective, and if it's not only aesthetic perspective, we can say that it was not a play. It was real withdrawal for another project, which shape is unclear. And for that moment, I would like to use only one example. And this example, this is Włodzimierz Wolski, and one of very, very well-known representatives of Warsavian bohema of the first half of the century, and his opus magnum, which is opera called Halka. Probably you know, some of you know Halka, composed by Stanisław Moniuszko. There is monument of Stanisław Moniuszko in Vilnius, and actually one of versions of this Halka, this opera, was performed in Vilnius. And what is this clique between aesthetics and politics? Wolski was involved, Włodzimierz Wolski, author of the text of Halka, was involved in this poetic bohemian movement in Warsaw in the first half of 19th century. And he was a representative of a line which in Polish history of culture is called chłopomania. How to translate it into English? Peasantphilia, something like that. Just romanticizing inhabitants of villages and treating them as the main source of national spirit, national aesthetic, being absolutely uncritical towards social reality of the village, and absolutely, and just celebrating absolute fanship toward aesthetics of a peasant's culture, folk songs, stories, costumes, etc., etc. And Wolski wrote quite a lot of poems inspired by Polish peasants' culture, not bad poems, bad poems, definitely bad poems. But there was a moment when he started his cooperation with Stanisław Moniuszko and wrote a libretto for opera. And what is the first version of libretto actually performed in Vilnius for the first time? A story written by Wolski goes like that. The first opening scene. This is a mother crying over the death of her daughter, peasant mother, going to the court, to the noble house, and fulfilling her vengeance over noblemen. And the figure of her vengeance is just catching a girl who became a wife of her son instead of her peasant's daughter, and just physically taking heart of this girl out from her chest. This is absolutely Quentin Tarantino of the 19th century. I mean, Quentin could learn from her. Halka, you could see now, this is just melodrama. Melodrama about peasant girl seduced by nobleman, having a child, losing a child, committing a suicide, etc., etc. And in 19th century, we have this whole process of censorship. This is not political censorship, but censorship connected with the norm, what can be performed in the theater. But Wolski, who was absolute representative of this Warsaw bohema, just playing this strange life, wrote a poem, wrote a libretto, which in Polish literature is one of the most revolutionary poems ever. What we can compare with is maybe Sen Srebrny Salomei, The Silver Dream of Salomia by Juliusz Słowacki, which is also a lesson for Quentin Tarantino and just a script for any possible violence. It means that, because I wouldn't like just to concentrate on names you will never address again, or titles you will never address again. It doesn't matter. But what I would like to point or to just underline, this is that being Bohemian in the first half of 19th century, of course, it meant being unproductive, but literature was generally unproductive in that time. But it meant also allowing himself to produce other version of the world or other version of the history. So I would call it soft revolution. And if there is anything interesting about these people, this is the soft revolution, these breaking points they touched, in their creative activities. Yes, and the other story, because I'm talking about Halka. Another story I think I have to touch here. This is a question about women, because just telling a story of bohema is under all those risks as telling any human story. And the risk is expressed in the question, whose story actually it is? All humankind, or maybe half of humankind? And absolutely, if we speak about bohema, alternatives, counterculture, in the first half of the 19th century, we speak about men and their written expressions, because according to apart from their revolutionary attitude to the world, in their according to their point of view, women were mothers, wives, and sisters, but mothers, wives, and sisters were generally nameless, and if not nameless, definitely speechless. The first not speechless bohemian woman in Polish history of culture is Stanisława Przybyszewska, a daughter of great modernist poet Stanisław Przybyszewski. Stanisława Przybyszewska died of hunger in Gdańsk. She was a great novelist and great playwright, and she died of hunger in Gdańsk. So this is just the fate of the daughter. And the second drawer for women, it was, of course, drawer entitled Mattresses and Prostitutes. And it was just a predicted role for women in these bohemian societies. But more or less in the same period, I don't know how it is with Lithuanian history of culture, but in Polish history of culture, as well as in English or French or German, slowly, there raised a kind of line which is called feminine writing. And I will not concentrate on feminine writing because this is really very wide theme. But I would ask a question, had women have their bohema? Had women have their bohema being not objects of bohemian life, but subjects, creators of bohemian life? And here I would like to mention only one name from Warsaw, from Polish history of culture, the name of Narcyza Żmichowska, born in 1819, died in 1876, and her enterprise, which was called, this is beautiful name, Miodogóra. Miodogóra means honey mountain, honey hill, and it was the third floor of the house in Miodowa, Honey Street, in Warsaw, where after many adventures of her life, prison, being involved in independence and national movement, traveling abroad, seeing world exhibitions, writing novels, etc., etc. In approximately in 1858, Narcyza Żmichowska established institution which was not institution. It was called Miodogóra, and the main notion for this institution was siostrzeństwo, sisterhood. It means that it was a person who has never married. She was surrounded by her friends, called her sisters, and they created a circle, self-educating, writing novels, reciting poems. I don't know about drinking alcohol, but I wouldn't exclude this line or this practice. Practicing equality, mutual support, and solidarity. And I think that if we ask what it means to be, I remind this case of Narcyza Żmichowska, not only because of historical curiosity. I was speaking about men, so finally, okay, let's tick this moment in a lecture. Let's say something about women. I would say that very deep spirit of being Bohemian is just celebrating or agreeing to be the other one, just celebrating and raising spirit of otherness, and being the other in the society, and celebrating being the other, using is not as the capital, but as a kind of treasure, a box with heirloom. And I think that women history of Bohemia or Bohemian women are particularly interested here, because in 19th century society, being a woman is always being the other. Being a woman, especially active, speaking, expressing herself, is always a kind of being the other, being the alien, and being the weak one also, politically, economically, etc., etc. And practicing sisterhood, practicing community, this is just raising those ideas who, in spite of this strange costume, characteristic for Bohemia, I don't know, cloaks or dresses or makeups or whatever. And yes, this is about just celebrating the values which are so crucial for being Bohemian. This is like being quick, being a friend, being practicing solidarity with the other, making the own way in the own culture, not aiming into success, and yes, fail better. Fail better. Yep, I think that's all what I would like to say. Thank you very much.
Ačiū, Małgorzata. Thank you, Małgorzata. Now the time is for our questions or thoughts or considerations. Please, you can use all languages you like to.
Yes, I would be really grateful for comments, questions, and you know, we are. This is 13 months of lockdown. Yes, 13 months of pandemia. So just any sign of human being alive or human being in contact is really precious. So I would be really grateful for comments, remarks, anything you would like to share. Thank you.
I don't see any hands on the screen. I wanna explore that opportunity to deepen Bohemian habits and comparisons, because I think that before Warsaw University was open, Vilnius was the place for those practices. Probably only without some famous female personages in that bohema. But if I think about Vilnius University bohema. One question for me is very important, and I know that you know the answer. How has it happened that the same group of people could be in some periods of time, shorter or longer, deep in that bohema, writing the poems of the bad pornography taste, or drinking those alcohols of the worst quality in Vilnius tavernas, and some months later, some sort of conversion towards extremely serious move related on patriotism, related on the public action, like conversion during so short period. The same group of people, one moment, deep in bohema, creating that atmosphere, and without any serious outside factors, somehow becoming the group of people of so different shape and style and form, whatever. Is it traceable? I remember my knowledge is based more on the texts like Zdzisław Kempinski, Mickiewicz Hermetyczny, or other writings, but especially him. He stressed on that one moment, the group of those guys from Vilnius University behaving in that way, and a moment later, just changing to some underground revolutionary and so serious organization.
I would say that the external factor is important, because if we speak about philomats and this circles of friends in Vilnius, it's not so clear to what extent they were really aimed at these national topics, focused on national topics. But what is important, this is trial of 1824 and 25, this court trial where some students of Vilnius University were caught and sentenced to many years in Siberia. And I would say that it was a fact catalyzing somehow identity of people participating in these circles of friends and different students communities in Vilnius. I would say that this external factor changed their activities from kind of amateur, in very positive sense, amateur activities into political activities. So this is absolutely external, and the next factor is uprisal in 1831, which just, it was military and political fact, and changed people writing about independence and dreaming about it into soldiers of the independence. And if we speak, for example, about history of immigration after 1831, it touches to some extent history of Lithuania as well, because in this immigration, which in Polish history is called Wielka Emigracja, big emigration, after the failure of November uprisal, leaving of those soldiers who found themselves basically in France was not living focused on ideas. It was living focused on looking for women and bread. There is a fantastic book by Alina Witkowska called Cześć I skandale, The Glory and the Scandals, about living of this great emigration, and showing perfectly that this story about spirit raised, this is just a story. and human experience was experience of organizing life, looking for bread, etc., etc. So yes, so I would say that there is no mystery in that. There is very particular historical moment, which is beginning of trial by Russian authorities, giving sentences and changing physically students involved into students' movement into martyrs of national issue. So it was absolutely external.
Let me argue a little bit, Professor. When I mentioned Kempinski, according to him, the crucial conversion of the moods appeared before Philomats or other student organizations were created. That bohema was developed before 1817. It's yes, clearly the repressions, Tsarist authorities, all that stuff, and later uprising and all that. I understand, but I'm not sure whether we speak about some psychological atmosphere in that academical bohema when the outside conditions are staying somehow quiet with no rapid changes. That early correspondence of Philomats shows that bohemic attitude, and later on they converted toward serious patriotic organizations. But before that, before 1817, that was this point. But anyway, probably we should leave something of that psychological atmosphere unclear. My next question is about one universal, I imagine, universal feature of bohema. Isn't it, feeling of joyfulness, some joy, humor, jokes? The only place where people are not behaving too serious. With alcohol or without alcohol, I don't pay attention to that. But somehow, what I find that bohema for those losers became the space where fully expressed joyfulness was cultivated. I brought myself from my shelf the book of Merkelis Račkauskas. Račkauskas was a professor of classical philology at Vytautas Magnus University after it was created. And at the same time, he became a grandfather of Thomas Venclova. But yeah. I appreciate so much this volume. And a couple of places, the sensitive author characterizes those young people from, disintegrated, disgraced noble estate, those poor Samogitian noblemen, kids of those noblemen. And he characterizes all group psychological type. They were so poor that some peasants just made jokes about them. They were so poor that the aristocracy around also cheated from them. Mm-hmm. But what Račkauskas tells about them, they were always in some bigger and very active groups, visiting pubs and tavernas, always with some newspapers in their hands, always debating about future of European politics or Tsardom or whatever. And what the most important insight of Račkauskas, I never saw them sad. Always with some smiles, with jokes, with anecdotes, always making tricks, behaving like tricksters in their own accorded society. Do you find some interaction of those general features like joyfulness, bohema with the sad face, somehow difficult to imagine, and that joyfulness also means some strength of the society, even in the moments when the people are say repressed, like Lithuania before 1905, with no right for Lithuanian language, no letters, everything what we know about that sad period of time. And even in that period, bohema made some happy wisdom, and even holota, smiling holota.
Yes, I was thinking about also, yes, just preparing the lecture. Okay, just maybe two examples. The first, of course, as any example, important for me is from Schiller, from the Räuber, and this is what they do. Karl von Moor, the main hero of Schiller and his friends, they tell the story afterwards. I mean, we confront the story, not just observing, but listening in the drama, the story told. While studying, Karl von Moor has a dog, and this dog is shot by someone. There is a kind of, I don't remember, a kind of adventure in the street of Leipzig, and the dog is shot. And Karl von Moor, what does he do? He organizes a funeral for the dog. It means that he pays the great money for bishops and all, church, how to say, ministrants, yes, people who attend this church celebrations, and because bishops and priests are greedy, they agree to organize celebrating funeral for the dog, and whole Leipzig is closed. This movement in the city is closed because there is a celebration of von Moor's dog. So this is one example, and another one is from the great so-called realistic novel in Polish literature called Lalka, the Doll, by Bolesław Prus. And Lalka is just a kind of panorama of 19th century Warsaw from the second half of the century. And in this panorama, there are 3 students of medical college, and they live somewhere in Warsaw on a attic, the worst place in a whole building. And what they do, they have a skull because they are medical students, and they put the string on the skull, and they just draw the skull down to make scary, people from the first and the second floor. So it means the skull, sometimes with the lights in her eyes or his eyes, appears just in the front of the window, and then ladies say, "Ah!" And this is students' bohemian life. And I think especially because Schiller, this is really scandal, but Prus, this is the second half of a century, and in Warsaw and generally in Lithuania as well, this is a really dark period. After January uprisal and these consequences, just military presence on the street, really hard time, permanent invigilation and so on. And Proust gives us these students as, you know, people playing with human skull. Yes, and just referring to these two examples, I think that what you call joyfulness, I would exchange into trick, or I don't know the right English or Lithuanian term, wygłup. It's not being joyful, it's just crossing the line, it's breaking the norm. Celebrating dog's funeral, or playing with human skull with lanterns in its eyes. This is just breaking the norm. This is playing with taboo. So I would say that understanding what this wygłup was, what this trick was, is connected with this notion of scandal. In a sense that no, I wouldn't agree that they were just people having a good time. I would say that they were people, as you said, being tricksters. It means they were people just walking through society and making this just checking where is the border, to what extent we can walk. Actually, I think that they were awful in their joyfulness, that they were awful, that they were people, I don't know, pouring cold water onto other people, yes, and using, I don't know, animals' corpse to have good time, etc., etc. That they were, I think that they were not nice. In a sense that, it was not just a nice cabaret. It was a kind of permanent examining where the norm ends and where is the line. Where is the line? Where our society ends. I mean, personally, I don't like them very much, so maybe it's my problem. I think that just living with them could be a kind of uneasy living, in a sense that they were not focused on having good time. They were focused on checking the normal culture, checking and just, slowly distracting this norm, pushing it aside. Yep. So it would be my answer.
Colleagues, please, your time. Remarks, questions, or some sharing your experiences of funny bohemian life in Kaunas of the pandemic time, like in Marquez novel somewhere. Anybody?
Yes, I think that this is just the difference, because these online meetings are really lovely, but I think that just we touch the difference, because in usual time I would be in Kaunas, and after the lecture we would go somewhere in Kaunas and we would talk and tell each other about what we did when we were students. And I wouldn't like those stories to be recorded. Yeah, but we are online. Okay, but I saw the hand, BB.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Somebody likes to ask, please.
Yeah, of course, I'd like to ask. With a pink elephant. So, but it is not a question, but my type of thinking, and now our modern or even postmodern era, what we are now having, and kind of from sociological view, if we see, like, what's Bohemia, what does, like, where does relation for me or association of Bohemia goes is that Bohemia is kind of connected with a public space, and in our times we have kind of pressuring of public space, and everything turns out to be to have an exchange value and economic value and all of those values, and we start to devalue the value of experience, and Bohemia is again a value of experience. They were all poor, and still they mostly are poor, and they don't have that exchange value, or money or something else, stock exchange market or something. They're not in there. They're kind of outsiders of society again, but in another way they have that kind of what we all forget all the time, living in this rationalized era of society, that there is another value that we should see in our lives, is that experience value. The value of experiences, of traveling, maybe, of, I don't know, of not having to eat maybe for a day or two because you don't have money, and just you need to think what to do. You need to maybe go on a street, and I don't know, write a short performance for yourself, and then play it in the street, and then get some money like this, and then go in a cafe or something else, And another point, as I said, that it's mostly that what we have in our times, that the public spaces are being pressured, and they're getting smaller and smaller, and the experience of Bohemia, as we probably saw in the 60s, especially in America, it were again turned out to have an exchange value, that there was a clothing style, the brands turned off to saw that there is a market of those jeans that are torn apart, so they just started to make them, and put a price on them, and value them even more than the normal jeans, that they don't have holes in them, and what happens, that we see, and another point is, that, as I said, the public spaces, the experiences of Bohemia turned to be now more and more privatized, of course, because of pandemia, but another point is that all the cafes, all the parks and everything, I don't know, in Lithuania we have those laws that you cannot drink outside, because it's illegal. So that point of Bohemian kind of experience, you cannot experience it because you cannot drink wine in a park, Why? It's like, oh, you're gonna be aggressive or something. I don't know. It's probably in another way. Yeah, that law is because some people are aggressive when they are using alcohol, but other people are not. And the question is, I think one way is, yeah, we are safer, but in another way we suppressed some kind of experiences of some people, and we start to privatize them more and push them to bars, to cafes, and out of parks, out of everywhere. And like, you go to a park, of course now in pandemic we could see more and more people in parks, but before, you go in a park and there's like no people, there's empty. Why? Because you cannot use alcohol in a public space anymore. You cannot meet friends and have a wine with them. And why? Come on, I'm not gonna kill anyone. We just want to have some fun and ideas. So, and of course, and there's another part, of course, of that experience of Bohemia that creates something, the plays, theater plays, poems, and all of those stuff. And in our times, we don't see that much anymore. It's probably very suppressed, that experience. It's very hard to see it and find it. like the authentic Bohemian part, especially in Lithuania, I think. But yeah, that's probably my view that I have.
More remarks or questions? If not, I would say some usual words, how much I am thankful, and I'm so happy that we are having this opportunity to join Warsaw Kaunas channel and have your insights. I hope that for our Academia cum laude members, it will have this inspiration effect, and we will have our meetings in the better conditions later sometimes. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for invitation, and I hope to see you in better times. And just I hope for the meeting in Kaunas in Warsaw on regular basis, just personal talk and cooperation. So thank you, and it was a pleasure to meet you. See you again.
Domai, your